Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm here with YYOGA. We're about to do a Pilates 10 minutes on our pelvic floor, where we get to strengthen the pelvic floor with specific Pilates exercises. So let's start on our back. I'd like you to bend your knees and bring your feet to the floor, parallel, hip distance apart. When you come down, just let your arms by your side and let your head down gently to the floor. Start by finding your breath. So your shoulders are nice and wide, your face is relaxed. And as you breathe in, think of bringing the breath to the sides and into the back of your rib cage, softening the front of the chest, the sternum, and the shoulders. When you exhale, start to feel the breath leaving your body, and you're kind of narrowing and gathering in towards the center, feeling those abdominals starting to wake up. Now, part of the abdominals is your pelvic floor that's just very subtly turning on. Every time you exhale, there's a little gentle squeeze coming up through that pelvic floor, joining in with those abdominals. So let's take a few more breaths and using our breath to activate the pelvic floor. Inhale wide into the back. And as you exhale, you can use your nose or your mouth to exhale and feel the softening and the narrowing of the front of the body and the gentle lifting of the pelvic floor. Now, we're going to find what's called the neutral pelvis. So I'd like you to, on your next inhale, lengthen your tailbone towards your heels. Feel your back flat to the floor. And as you exhale, think about your tailbone coming up towards your back, towards your shoulders, and creating a big arc underneath that lumbar. Inhale to lengthen and flatten the back to the floor, and then exhale to find that arc. Now, somewhere in the middle between these two moves is your neutral. So let's take an inhale, lengthen the tailbone, but keep a little space underneath that lumbar. From there, we have our neutral pelvis. And we can actually start breathing and finding a little more of that pelvic floor. Bring your hands to your hip points at the front. Just notice that they're leveled. Depending on your low back and your hip flexors, you might feel that one is a little bit off. So you can help it by just breathing and maybe bringing a little more weight towards the right or the left hip, depending on what your hips are feeling like today. Now, without changing this, slowly lift your right foot. Lift your left foot, keeping your neutral pelvis. Bring your right foot down and your left foot down. Now leading with your left, lift your left foot and your right foot. Bring your left foot down and your right foot down. Continue. Your hands can be on the floor. Shoulders are nice and relaxed. Your core strength is coming from that deep lower abdominal area and your pelvic floor. So when you breathe in, think of that wide inhale. And when you breathe out, really narrowing out, letting softening happen at the front, widening happening at the back. So you want to feel that the pelvic floor is kind of easing into its gentle squeeze, and then it's relaxed. Your body is meant to be able to turn on and also release and relax. And that's what we're doing with our whole body as well as the pelvic floor. So we've got one more on each side. And when you come back, bring both feet down and just let your body relax for a moment. Let the pelvic floor release. Notice that your pelvis is still neutral. From here, I just want you to take your right thigh slightly out to the right and then exhale it back in using the pelvic floor and the abdominals. Inhale your left thigh just slightly off to the left. And then exhale, draw it in, finding that pelvic floor. Inhale the right thigh out to the side and exhale, bring it in. Keep your shoulders wide, keep your head on the ground, shoulders on the ground, just moving one leg bone, then the other. Now, if you wanted to go to the next level, bring your knees over your hips and start to bring your right leg out. It's a lot harder. Exhale, bring it in. Again, using your pelvic floor. If you start to feel your shoulders shrugging or your muscles of your face tensing, then this level might be too hard. You might want to return back to keeping your feet on the ground. So when we work our pelvic floor, everything is very subtle. Our pelvic floor is not a big muscle, but it's a very important one. A big team of muscles, a team of muscles made up of small muscles. And then when you come back, bring your feet down and then bring your feet parallel, knees parallel. Let's go into bridge pose. Inhale, let's exaggerate the tailbone towards the heel so your back is flat on the floor and lift your pelvis. Now, once your hips are lifted, find your feet, relax a little bit through those thighs, relax a little bit through those hips. Let your hips kind of just hang out here. Don't force them any higher. And while you're here, take a deep inhale, wide into the ribs, wide into the shoulders. And as you exhale, feel a subtle, gentle squeeze through that pelvic floor. On the next one, see if you can use your inner thighs to keep the legs more parallel. As you exhale, feel those inner thighs squeezing towards the center. Pelvic floor is going to feel a little bit more activated, hopefully. One more time, inhale. And exhale. We're preparing to come down. We'll articulate the spine. Inhale first. Keeping your pelvis lifted, roll down from the upper part of your spine. Keeping your pelvis as high as you can keep it, rolling down the back of the rib cage. Keeping your pelvis up, rolling down the lumbar. Keeping your pelvis up, rolling down the sacrum. And then at the very end, you can bring your pelvis down and find your neutral pelvis. Little space underneath your lumbar. Okay, let's go up again. Inhale, lengthen the tailbone, lift your hips. I'd like you to take your inner thighs towards the center. Feel a little squeeze there. Shoulders wide. And now we're going to take the right hip just slightly towards the ground and then use your pelvic floor to lift that hip back up. Left hip slightly towards the ground. Use your pelvic floor to lift it up. So your hips are dropping from one side to the other. Very subtle. Your inner thighs and your pelvic floor are bringing your hips back in line so they're leveled and back in their position. So we've got one more per side, keeping your breath going. And then from here, take an inhale. Articulate your spine, rolling down. Take your time. And as you get to the very bottom, your pelvis is going to come down at the very end. Find your neutral pelvis. So think about that little space underneath your low back. From here, we're going to float the shins one at a time. Bring your knees over your hips. And then just start to extend your leg. Single leg stretch. One leg bends, one leg extends. Now we're going more into our bigger muscles using the legs. So can you still find that subtleness in your pelvic floor, around the pelvic floor as you bring your legs in and as you bring your legs out? Your pelvis is neutral, so there's always that little space underneath your lumbar. And when you're breathing, you're allowing the breath to help engage some of those deeper muscles. So the breath is natural. You breathe in, you breathe out. You don't want to force it. You just let the breath move the muscles. Inhale. And exhale. Last two. And last one. We're going to bend the knees, bring your feet down. So bringing it back to the subtleness of the pelvis, let's go into hip circles. So here you're kind of going to go around a clock and it's going to be very small. So let's just start by shifting the weight to the right hip and then tilting the hips down so you're a little more on that tailbone, shifting to the left hip, and then lengthening and flattening the back so you can go all the way across to the right side and repeat the circle. So here we're moving into the side of the hips and the front and the side of the hips and the back. So we're kind of creating a very small micro movement here from the musculature of the pelvis. Let's do one more round and come back to neutral pelvis. Take a nice inhale, bring the weight to the left hip. We're going to reverse the direction. Take it towards the pubic bone, towards the floor. Think about your right hip and then the tailbone towards the floor. So we're moving from the hip to the pubic bone, from the right hip to the tailbone, and the left hip to the pubic bone, and the right hip to the tailbone. And because it's so small, the slower, the better. The less you can move your legs, the better. The less you can move your shoulders, your head. Just keep everything out of the way. One more. And when you get back to center, find your neutral pelvis, little space underneath the lumbar. All right, let's finish up. Bring your knees over your hips. Bring your legs together, and let's just do a double leg stretch. Again, we're adding bigger muscles, but we're going to use the subtleness of the neutral pelvis and the pelvic floor. Inhale and exhale. Let's do 4 more here. Inhale and exhale. Last 2. And last 1. And then bend your knees, bring your feet down, relax your pelvis, and relax the rest of your body. And that is your neutral pelvis. 10 minutes of focusing on that very important part of our body for Pilates. Please tune in for some more 10-minute Pilates sessions here and other movement classes with myself, Hannah, and YYOGA. Thank you so much for joining.